In the Water. Written and narrated by Spookaria. Hello my little spooklings. So today, I'm doing something a little bit different. In the Water is a story I wrote many years ago. It was my first Halloween special back in 2019. At the time, I wasn't happy with how the audio turned out, and it has been a goal of mine to redo it at some point. So today is the day, here it is. Also, please let me know what you think. For those who remember, here's another little treat from the past. It's time to grab a warm drink, sit back, curl up with a blanket, and get ready. I present to you, In the Water. This event happened many years ago during my childhood. The family had made the journey by car up to the Central Coast. Apparently we had been there before when I was really little, but I don't really remember it. We were going to stay with my aunt and uncle at a holiday resort. Again, it was the same place we stayed when I was really little. I slept most of the way, like I usually do with long car trips, and it would often mean I would have a burst of energy when we arrived, which was particularly annoying for other people who were tired from the journey. I don't remember the dream if I had one. Dad placed his hand on my shoulder and shook me gently to wake me up. I rubbed my eyes and looked around. It didn't take me long to fully wake up. The resort was pretty big. I could see a barbecue area, a playground, several cabins, manager's office, and it was really close to the water. The dock was close by and could be seen by the cabin we were staying in. I got out of the car and looked around with my sister. She remembered a lot more than I did. She pointed out something she remembered. We got fish and chips for dinner and settled in. The cabin had several different bedrooms, so it meant my parents would share one room, my aunt and uncle would share another, and my sister and I had 2 single beds in a room close to the front of the cabin. The floor was wood. It was old, creaked when you walked on it, and there was no carpet in the cabin. The furniture was all pretty bare bones, but I didn't expect anything different. Everyone else was tired and went off to sleep fairly early. Since I had already slept, I couldn't settle down to sleep and felt restless. I could hear the faint snoring from the other rooms. I looked over towards my sister. She was sound asleep. I briefly regretted sleeping earlier because now I was wide awake. Naturally, my parents told me to stay in bed so I wouldn't wake anyone up. But perhaps I should just get a glass of water. Slowly I looked around the room. It was quiet, dark but not perfectly black. I decided against it because the floor was creaky, and I didn't want to wake up my parents. My dad could be quite grumpy when he was woken up, and he was also quite the light sleeper. So I pulled the blanket up over my head, snuggled into it, and rolled over to face the wall. I blinked a couple of times, thinking about the day. Slowly I began to feel myself drift off to sleep. But right when I was doing so, I could hear a notorious creak from the other side of the room behind me. I froze. I drew in my breath and was as quiet as possible. I wanted to make out who it was. I used to be able to recognize everyone's footsteps in the family. Mum's, Dad's, my sister's. I knew them all. This one sounded different. I hadn't heard the door open, and the last I saw, my sister was still asleep in bed. Or at least, she should have been. I tried to force myself to relax. It was a strange place, and I have a vivid imagination at times. Surely that's all it was. The walking started again. The gait was slow, awkward, like feet being dragged along the floor. Slowly the footsteps came toward me and stopped at the foot of my bed. Then nothing. I gulped. It wasn't anything. It was just my imagination. That's all it had to be. That's all it was. I wrapped the blankets tightly around me, still pretending to sleep, and hoped whatever it was would just leave me alone. I waited for who... It couldn't have been anyone else. It had to have been my sister. She was the only person who would do something like this. Maybe she was going to poke me or try to scare me. Nothing. Then I felt a weight on my feet. Someone was sitting on me. My eyes widened in fear and my body was tense. I waited for my sister to say something or joke around. Anything. I don't remember what followed. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep. I woke up the next morning later than everyone else. It felt as though I hadn't slept properly for months. I was drained and felt faint. Maybe I ended up oversleeping. I rubbed my eyes and could smell breakfast cooking. Pancakes, toast, bacon and eggs. My stomach grumbled instantly. I pushed the blankets off and placed my feet on the floor. I stood up and saw my blankets had a wet, dirty patch where my feet had been. It smelled like the river. I reached out and touched it, rubbed the dirt between my fingertips and stood staring at it. What? There were 2 footprints on the floor. They were both dirty and still wet. They were the only ones there. I stared down at them in fear, anger, and confusion. I didn't think it would have been my sister. They were far too large and were so narrow. Who else could it have been, though? It was quite an elaborate prank for her. I didn't want to get in trouble for getting the place dirty. I turned and said to my sister, "Why'd you try to scare me last night? Why were you wet and dirty?" "What? No. Why would I do a thing like that?" "Well, who else could it have been?" Things escalated and we started yelling at each other. My dad came in, and as expected, he wasn't happy about us fighting, or about the mess on the floor. I tried to tell him it wasn't me, but he wouldn't listen. I had to clean up the mess, and I was not pleased about this at all. But what else could I say? I cleaned up the mess and joined my family for breakfast, but when I saw the food, I felt nauseous and barely ate. I barely picked at my food before we walked to the water. The river was beautiful. The water was peaceful. The sound of water was endless and relaxing to listen to. It had that distinctive smell. We were going to go fishing for the first time. My uncle had brought my sister and I fishing rods. We caught plenty of fish. And, hilariously, my uncle didn't catch any. And he actually sulked about it. It was pretty funny. Later on that evening, I walked along the dock and looked down into the water. I thought I saw a long, white eel, but then I noticed there was a hand attached to it. What? It started waving up at me, curling its fingers to encourage me to get closer. I couldn't look away from it. Whatever it was, I was spellbound. The pale hand circled around in the water. I leaned closer. Nothing else mattered or existed anymore. I wanted to get a closer look. What then looked like a head was about to rise to the surface. When... My dad grabbed me and did that thing where they hold on to you, but pretend they were going to push you in the water. I squealed and burst into giggles. The spell, or whatever it was broken. I could move and look away. The underwater figure had disappeared. It had been a long day. We walked back to the cabins to eat dinner and get ready for bed. I couldn't help but look back at the water. But I saw nothing. I had a strange feeling I was being watched from it though. I was nervous about going to sleep. I got ready for bed. It was a lot warmer than it had been previously, so I just wore a singlet nightie and only had my blanket around my legs. I curled up and watched as my sister read her book with the light on. Eventually, she turned it off and said goodnight. I was tempted to ask her to stay up late with me, and maybe she would have, but I didn't. I shivered and waited to see what would happen next. Slowly, the noise of the cabin died down, and the sound of light snoring could be heard. Then, nothing. Not a sound. All I could do was relax and hope I would fall asleep soon. I rolled over to face the wall, sighed, wiggled my toes, and began to drift off to sleep. I was so close. I heard the footsteps again. They got louder, more chaotic, as whoever or whatever came up behind me. It didn't stand at the foot of the bed. It stood by the side, with me being stuck between it and the wall. It said nothing. I said nothing. I shivered. I could feel it sit on the bed behind me. I tried not to say anything or move. I couldn't speak. My eyes wide in horror as I felt it curl in around me. It was wet. The frame was small, like a child, about my height and weight. And the bite of the cold was sharp. It hurt so much, it hurt so much. It was so cold that it burned. It lay close to me, on me. I closed my eyes, pretended to sleep, and silently prayed. I prayed to God, to anything or anyone who would save me from whatever this was. I heard a gargling behind me. It sounded like it was trying to speak to me. I closed my eyes shut. I said nothing. I must have drifted off to sleep. I awoke with my bed still wet. It smelled like the river. I wrinkled my nose in disgust. My sister asked me what was on the back of my head. I reached back and pulled seaweed? There was seaweed and grimy dirt. I didn't know what to say. Before my parents woke up, I put the bed linen in the washing machine, remade my bed, and got in the shower when I heard they were just starting to wake up. This wasn't much of a holiday. I wanted to go home. To be anywhere but here. Today, I went out onto the boat with my sister, uncle, and dad to try to catch more fish. We were pretty successful. I can't remember what kinds we caught. I kept double checking over the side, paranoid I would see a pale arm, or a face, or possibly the boat would tip over. But it didn't happen. We got back to shore safely. The fish were being prepared for dinner. They were being cleaned and prepared for cooking. There was another family staying there that my family were getting close with. They shared their oysters and I didn't want to try them. They looked like blobs of snot, but I was called a chicken, so as a result of peer pressure, I decided to try it. It was interesting. My sister was playing by the dock. The water nearby was shallow enough to easily see things. I enjoyed this part. I've always loved nature and seeing animals in their natural habitats. You could see baby fish, occasionally a jellyfish or a crab, but she was most excited about an eel in the deeper end. I went over to look, but I missed it. Not that I wanted to admit it at that age, but I just said it was pretty cool. I'm not sure why, but I went to chat with my auntie when I heard a loud splash. I don't know how it happened, but she fell in, and honestly, it was pretty hilarious. I nearly wet myself with laughter and I couldn't breathe. My uncle was there to help her out of the water. She was asked why she fell in. Her face was bright red with embarrassment, and she didn't say why. It wasn't like her to be like this. Even after making a mistake, she would normally brush it off and be the first to laugh. When I pressed her about it, she told me to shut up and leave her alone. It was the last night we would be staying there. Everything was packed away so we would leave early. I felt better about things. The routine was pretty standard. I got ready for bed and made sure I was asleep first. I didn't want to be the last one to sleep again. I drifted off to sleep easily and happily, after a much-needed rest after a long day. I couldn't move. I woke up pinned between the wall and that cold, lifeless, wet body. The child, I think, it wasn't very large. I looked up and finally got a good look at it. The skin was deathly pale and slowly peeling off. The eyes were empty pits where eyeballs should have been. The body was bloated in some areas and skeletal in others. The lips looked as though there had been bites taken out of it. It was back, again. It held me tightly while I struggled to breathe. My arms were tightly pinned. I struggled. It was a lot stronger than I was. No. I tried to speak, but I couldn't. But it could. The freezing cold was on my neck. I could smell rotting meat and fish. The smell nearly made me sick.
Your sister was supposed to be payment for all the fish. I will see you again.
They kissed my cheek, and my eyelids felt heavy. The last thing I heard was,
"We can swim together. Forever."
I haven't been back there again. Every so often I think about that place, and wonder why I've had issues when I'm around bodies of water. This wasn't my last spooky encounter near one. It has been many, many years since that occurred, and I wonder what would happen if I went back. I didn't want to be payment for whatever this being was. I never want to go back. Ever. And I hope my sister never goes back either. I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, please make sure you like, comment, subscribe, and all that good stuff. It definitely helps me out. Actually, stab that like button. I will be revising some of my older content really soon, along with bringing a range of brand new stories. So what do you think it was? Let me know in the comment section down below. This video is made with the support of my incredible patrons, channel members, top tippers, and subscribers. I appreciate all the support that has been given. You guys are truly a blessing. Check out my merch account and my social media links. Stay safe, my little spooklings. And remember, I'll be watching you.